I'm Rick from Cartridge Classic Cars. We're back on this 69 Charger and we're kind of wrapping things up. On this video, the idea is we're going to go ahead and continue from our last video on the lower valance. We're going to install the trunk, the rear tail panel to trunk floor supports. We got the rear hatch screwed into place. We're going to put the trunk on, make sure everything fits before we weld that. We're going to cut this car off on the frame jig, bolt on the front end, and maybe get some wheels on it and do a walk around kind of before, after conclusion on the car. So stay tuned and we'll get to it. So these brackets going from the tail panel, lower valance to the trunk floor pan, they're really crucial in the back of this Charger. It really gives the whole tail end of this car just a little more structure. So what we want to do, we want to make sure they're really just tacked and pushed flush with all the panels there against. You know, I was taking some pins, like a screwdriver in there, moving them up and down, pulling them back, using a body hammer to really beat them down. The tail panel, the lower valance on this car, the stamping was really bad on it. Really that goes along with the quarter panels. You saw in the last video, I wasn't happy with any of the rear parts. Just nothing fits. Everything was really cheap quality. So even these holes had to be kind of ground out and moved in. And I know if you watch previous videos on this car that this whole rear trunk pan is jigged in place. This was the height it was on the car and everything. So I'm pretty confident that it's actually the problems in the valance. On the next step of this process, and getting this car ready to go, we're going to go ahead and actually remove it from the jig points. It's been jigged up since the day it came in the shop and just was put up so it didn't move. And while we built the whole car, I think this is crucial. But now it's time to just remove the jig points in all areas. We did cut a couple off earlier just while we were, putting in a rocker panel or something else. So not all the points are on there, but the idea behind this is it was just tacked in the car. So really cutting off the car is not that big of a deal. And you see I'm sawzalling off the jig, and then before the next car comes in its place, I'll go ahead and just grind down the jig flush level like nothing's ever been built on it before. I am going to leave the torsion bar support and the one supports on the rear shackle area. The reason being is they actually have pins going up through them, so the car is actually still held in place. And you'll see in a little bit when we take the lift under it, we'll just be able to lift it right off the pins while we still have the support, so we don't have to cut it off on the lift or anything like that. I'm putting in the brackets to hold the studs for the trunk itself, and what I did, I have the trunk latch in place. It's only screwed in. So what we're going to do, you're going to see, we're going to install the trunk in a second, and then what we'll do, we're going to get it closed and we're going to adjust the latch bracket left and right to make sure our gapping's correct on the quarter panels. Normally, if I'm doing a full quarter panel install, if you watched the last video, I went over that whole process. But if I'm doing a full quarter panel install, this trunk would have already been on this car. However, we did not do anything with the top of the quarters. We did not do anything with the tail panel, and we were told not to do anything with the trunk gutters. So those areas, nothing moved. There's no reason that this trunk can't stay off the car until now. And you see at this point, it fits just like it did when it came in. I did put the trunk latch in its factory location. I knew where the holes were drilled out, but you could see after closing the trunk, we were less than a 16th off. So what we're going to do, we're going to just pull it over just a hair to the passenger side, and then we don't have to adjust the trunk latch itself on the trunk, which was centered up, and there is adjustment in there. But to me, while we're welding this bracket, if we're moving a 16th of an inch, I'd rather just move that, making sure the trunk lock and everything is also straight. But once we do that, the trunk closes, the gaps look good, we verified everything, we can go ahead and start the welding process. What I'm going to do, I'm going to use the spot welder first, just because it's going to be easier to make sure everything's clamped down in place really good. I'm going against the holes, the factory holes that we did drill out. Now, I didn't go all the way through, so the trunk latch does have the backing for me to weld through. But we'll go ahead and use the spot welder first, get all the areas going to the tail panel, and then we're also gonna right now weld with a different arm attachment onto the lower valance. So we got a couple welds to go down both sides of that, and then we're gonna come back through after this is all welded up, and at this point the trunk latch is completely locked into place. But we're gonna go back through then and fill up all the MIG weld, the rosette holes with some MIG welder, just to make it clean, and then grind everything back down. If this was a new panel, we wouldn't have to do that. We would just go ahead and use the spot welder and this job would be done. This is something that you could just put tons of screws in and just make sure it's in the right spot. And like I said, just move it around. The spot welder that it does clamp out, we don't have to put as many screws in there, but every time I'm welding a section of the trunk latch, what I didn't show is I am closing the trunk and rechecking the gaps. We just want to make sure nothing has moved. Now I did put a couple screws on the bottom and a couple screws on the top, so really there's no reason it should, but you just got to double check this stuff because you don't want to go ahead and cut it out later, or you don't have to shim something excessive amount. It's just a whole lot cleaner if your car's together straight with no shims. What we're doing right now, like I said, we're going back through with the MIG welder, filling up all the holes, and then we'll go back through and finish grind it. And at this point, the whole back of this car is almost complete. The final piece to this install is going to be putting on the rear bumper. As you can see, it's the original bumper. It's still rusted. Like I said, we didn't get any new parts with the car. We were just given certain things, and the owner's going to come back through, and I guess when he gets it back home, he's going to assess the rest of the parts and finish the car. The wonderful thing about these jigs in our garage is basically everything has wheels right now, so you could take a strip car. I mean, the jigs are really heavy, but you could see with ease that a couple people, they could be moved around and adjusted properly, so we can, you know, sit there and put the car in one corner, focus on where we're doing it, and get the other side as we want to work on it out in the open where it's easier on us and the car's not at risk of being damaged. At this point, we just got the lift set up. We're gonna go ahead and install the front end. As you can see, this front end is in really rough shape. If you look around a lot of this Charger, a lot of it is in really, really bad shape. This is actually the first car I think I've ever done that has left here without at least 95% of the metalwork complete. You know, the owner and I, just be realistic, if you watch the last video, we had a difference of agreement on the proper way to fix the car, and he wanted it done a certain way and started dictating it, and it was just going south really quick. So at this point, no hard feelings. He found a shop that he feels is going to be better and it's going to do the way he wants to do it. As far as this car, my name's involved in it, as you will go through in a second, and I'll show you the parts of the car that I've done, and I'm very happy on most of the parts that I've done. There's a certain point that was starting being dictated and the car started going down south. So at that point, I unfortunately had to let the car go, let the owner take it off, no hard feelings. He's going to hopefully find a guy that's going to do what he wants and turn this car into what I feel it can be with just a little bit of work and the right attention. We all just want a fairy tale ending, and honestly with this car, I think from the day it arrived, I think maybe the owner was unaware how bad the car really did start out, and I didn't put the rust there, and I honestly hate giving these phone calls and telling these people, these owners, and it happens all the time. I can't stress this enough. If you get involved in a project like this, if you think it's bad, it's probably twice as bad as you think. Especially, unfortunately, these Mopars, they rot almost seems from the inside out. So what was supposed to be a little project just can getting deeper and deeper, and it is stressful on the owner. I understand it's really hard. I mean, I wish I could change stuff, but I can't make shortcomings on the whole project just to save $1. That's just not how the shop operates. But back to the project, we got the lift under it. We're about to pull it off the frame jig. You can see, just being that we're going to put major suspension components, the rear end and the front end under this car, we're going to go ahead and strap it on the lift just to make sure nothing moves and we're safe. The suspension also is just being bolted on the bare minimum bolts. If you remember when we took it off, it was completely rusted through and wheels are seized on the car. Nothing works. So at this point, the owner has asked that we just reinstall the suspension as we got it. So we're going to do our best to follow those instructions. Here's a couple photos, as I was saying, what the car arrived like. And here's a shot of the look around on the parts that we did underneath the car. You could see a lot of work was done on the car. This again is the torsion area and the rot where it started. And the car just, when it unraveled, it only got worse and worse. But like I said, this car has a really, really solid foundation. I think the front end is all bolt-on parts if you found the right donor vehicle for it. I think the quarter panels, I said in the last video, still need a lot of work. Looking at how rotted away this car was to what we turned down to with the full floor pans, the full trunk pans, the frame rail removal, the inner outer wheel houses, really the next person that works on this car really should have a good base. And most shops, honestly, I think dream of getting a project like this where they could just do some outer body repair and just cosmetically make it a lot better. The chassis with the frame rails and everything, to me, that's the hardest part to do, and especially on these cars, the kind of the most complicated of all the jobs and overwhelming. So really, I know most shops are going to be happy to see this car. Also, everything under this car is in the E-coat. It is not primered. The frame rails are, because they did start out like this, all rusted and blown through when we sandblasted them. But for the most part, everything under here is in an E-coat. The frame rails are an epoxy coat, and the floor pan where the rear seat sits upon, or the shock towers are, that's also an epoxy. But everything else like that, we left it alone once we got the undercoating and rust off this car. That's another thing. If you see a car with lots of caked up undercoating like this Charger, that's a red flag. I'm telling you from personal experience, it's only going to get worse. Once you remove that, once you blast it, the pinholes start showing up, the rust starts showing up, and where the rust was just blows right through. We also put inner rockers on this Charger. They were also gone. We did outer rocker patches, new torsion member. This is what we actually started with, and only a month and a half ago, that's what the car looked like. What I also use my frame jigs for is we mount the suspension. We pull them off on the frame jigs, we put them back on. It's bulky enough that we have no problems dropping the car right down on it. And then I can actually lock the wheels with putting the legs down and really work the suspension under the car. So we're trying to do it both the front and rear suspension at the same time, but honestly it didn't work that way. So you'll see we'll drop the car back down, and again you could see the straps going under the door holding on the lift, because we're going to be under there really rocking this car, trying to get a whole axle assembly with rusted springs and everything that doesn't want to go together, you know. So if this was all one piece at a time, it would probably be a little bit easier. But as the rear axle comes on, you see we're going to lift it up, and what we're going to end up doing, we're going to walk the front suspension towards the back of the frame jig, and what that's going to allow us to do is drop the lift further to get the Charger all the way down to the K-member. It's just going to be easier than jacking the K-member up to the Charger. As you can see, we're just going to clear the lift. That's the only problem with this lift, is it just doesn't have as much underneath the car. It's got that arm that comes out, the cantilever lift, versus like a two-post lift on the side where we could drop the front down all the way. But again, its benefits outweigh its disadvantages. So right here we just adapt, overcome, and adjust to what we're trying to do. And now we got the K-member set down on the car. We're just gonna push it around a little bit, put the 4 bolts in there, the upper control arms, the shocks, and you know, a little bit, this car's looking like a roller again. As far as the suspension, front end, everything else that we put on the car, we put it on as best we can, knowing it's going to have to come off. I did my best to align it, but we didn't spend tons of time wasting the owner's money on something I know that's going to have to come off and be metal worked anyway. The final step on this Charger, after we got the torsion bars and everything in this car, is we're going to put the wheels on. This car is a full wheel drum brake car, and it's got the factory hardware. It's going to be reverse thread on the driver's side. Don't forget, a cars these years, GM, I mean all of them really, if it's got the drums especially, reverse thread. So if you're cranking on one of these things pulling out of the junkyard and it's not coming off, think about that for a second. So we'll drop it on the Go Jacks just so we have it mobile and get it ready for the owner to pick up. We're pulling the straps off, and we're about to wrap this project up. The last step is really just get the lift out there, and what we'll end up doing, we'll just do one quick walk around on the whole car just to show you what we got, what we're doing, and a final thoughts. Wrapping up the video on the 69 Charger, we'll just do a quick walk around of all the work that we did. If you look at it initially, it almost looks like we didn't do anything, because most of the car is pretty much, we did the base and the foundation for the car. This car at this point, I said it earlier and in the last video, the owner sending it to another shop that's going to do the work the way he wants it done. So what we did, we put the parts that you know, I felt were no good on it or that the car came with, and let the other shop work with it how the owner wants it done. But you see these fenders, both sides of them, they're pretty much paper thin. They're pretty rusted out. The hood's lined up really well. The hood just needs a little bit of work. It's got some rust issues that's kind of fallen down with some peel and paint, but you could see where we did the work on the epoxy, everything's set in place. The front suspension is pretty much all rusted out, but it's bolted in place the way it came. When we close the hood, like I said, everything works out good. It's still not perfectly aligned. We kind of just test fit everything into place. This fender, you can see same thing. Both of these fenders are just paper thin. They go all the way up. If you push too hard, you'll go right through these fenders. So more than likely, this car is going to need another fender. The doors on the car are pretty good. You can open them and close them fine. You see we did the whole interior as far as the floor panels. Everything inside has been epoxy sandblasted down. It's still going to need some work on the roof, both the top and bottom. It's got some dents and stuff like that that someone will have to go through. Basically, talking to owner, the hinges are a little bit worn out. Talking to owner, everything we did on the car pretty much here down is pretty much brand new. But then on the way up, it still needs to be done. You saw we did the quarter skins. We fixed a lot of the deck filler area. This area is really smooth. It's pretty solid. The trunk. We put the trunk on. The trunk was actually in really good shape. We got the trunk where it opens and closes fine. The whole back of the trunk has pretty much been redone. All the metal work's been done on it. We bolted on the rear bumper, again, just to make sure everything fits. Trunk closes good, gaps are good. The tail panel and the valance look good all together. Looking down the side of the car, we did this quarter skin. And same thing, this door opens and closes. The hinges, it probably needs a little bit of hinges. There's a little bit of room, wiggle room in there, but all in all, it opens and closes. So thanks for sticking along. This is gonna be the last video, the last time this Charger is here in this shop and that we're working on the channel. Hopefully this car gets the right attention it needs. I think it has a great base and the foundation to be a beautiful car. Stay tuned. We'll do another couple of these projects. We'll try something else and we'll do another build. And along the channel, we're gonna do one or two, you know, smaller projects there in the shop, but we'll just highlight some stuff. So thanks for liking, thanks for commenting. Thanks for subscribing to our channel. Hope you enjoyed this project. Until the next time, I'm Rick from Cartridge Classic Cars. We'll see you soon.